So I have a couple of announcements to make. The first is that today is the last date for course registration. So there's a deadline for course registration, October 15th. So I see some 37 people who are currently in the meeting. A few of them are, of course, auditing.
Yogesh, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yogesh?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you hear me, Yogesh?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Did you have anything to say, Professor Ghoshal?
No, I just thought I just
Okay.
wanted to check whether my internet and things were working fine or not.
Okay. So today is a deadline. So please be sure to register for the course today. I don't know the exact time by which you have to register, but the sooner the better. So of the 37 people who are attending the class, whoever has found it interesting enough that they want to learn more about dynamics and controls of mechanical systems, please do not forget that today is a deadline for registration. So the second announcement is in connection with the attendance, and of course, a lot of you are very concerned about having missed giving attendance because you had to leave a few minutes earlier and so on. Now, when I download the actual Excel sheet from Microsoft Teams, it gives me the complete data of when you logged in and when you logged out. So even though you might or might not have formally entered your name in some Excel sheet or whatever, I would know if you are here. So please don't worry about having to leave a few minutes earlier or so, and therefore risk losing attendance. I think between me and the TAs, Yogesh and Rakesh, we will make sure that if you are there for a substantial period of time, we would know when you logged in and when you logged out. So we would know how long you were here. So if you are here for more than 40-50 minutes, then we know that you have more or less attended the class, and then we will give you the necessary, we will give you attendance. So this is as far as attendance is concerned. The last announcement had to do with the class notes. So what I discover is that I end up making substantial changes to the material that I intend to teach a few hours before I teach. So I'm constantly working on this material. So although I had prepared some notes for this course, I now discover that a lot of the stuff that was there in the notes, for example, of the previous lecture and so on, I had modified them substantially. I changed the order in which they were presented, eliminated some material, introduced some other material, and so on. So I have to now rework that entire class notes, and before I can share that with you, so that it is presented in a manner that is in alignment with the way I gave the lecture. So I thought, for the moment at least, let us decouple distribution of, lecture notes from giving the lectures themselves. Lecture notes, I would agree, is very important if the only experience you had was sitting through this class. But you also have the recording available to you now. So that's a bonus this time on account of online teaching. So my request to all the attendees is that I will distribute the notes in good time, maybe before your midterm for sure. But in the meantime, please bank on the recordings. If you have questions, go back to the recordings and listen to them again and get back to me with questions if any. I will not be able to send you lecture notes immediately after lectures because I'll have to rework them substantially in the light of the new material that I would have added in preparation for a particular class. And the last one is a homework. I will be sending a homework tomorrow. It will be due next week. The exact deadline, etc., will be announced. So I just wanted to mention everyone who is crediting the course that you would have a homework coming your way sometime tomorrow. I think we have your email addresses. So if you do not have, if you have not communicated with Yogesh, kindly send an email to Yogesh Pratap Singh and indicate that you would be crediting the course so that you too receive the homework copy. Or we could also upload it on the website. I hope you have made note of the website address, and then you can download it from there. So with those words of introduction, let us get down to discussing technical stuff. I shall share the screen as always. Please give me a few minutes. Can all of you see my white sheet of paper? Can
Yes,
someone
sir.
please unmute
Yes,
the mic
sir.
and let me know? Oh, thank you, thank you.
Yes, sir.
So let us get started. I shall switch on the light for better illumination. Yeah, good. So the topic of today's lecture is we'll continue to discuss about rotation matrices and also talk about visualizing these matrices by using what are known as Euler angles. So this is the content for today's lecture. As always, we shall briefly recap what we discussed in the previous lecture. So the first point we tried to drive home was the significance of the B frame. So B frame was not a cosmetic addition to solution of a problem in dynamics. It had a bigger role as a consequence of the simplifications that would happen if one were to represent forces and moments experienced by a rigid body in the frame of reference of the rigid body itself. So we first talked about the significance of the B frame, which is the frame that is fixed to the rigid body and moves along with it. Then we also, now that we have decided to go with the B frame, there was this necessity to, yes?
Sir, can you place your camera near to the page?
Closer, is it? Okay, but
Okay.
when I do that,
So
what
ask
will
people,
happen
sir.
is that sometimes what I write will be below
No, I'm
the
asking sir,
field of
whether he
view
will
camera.
pass or not. If he passes,
Pardon,
then that is sufficient.
pardon me?
Sir,
Hello? I think there was some crosstalk. So I have lowered the camera. Hopefully the font is bigger now. And in this case, kindly remind me if I'm writing below the field of view of the paper. Okay. So we have, now that we have a B frame, we have to now relate the B frame, the body fixed accelerating frame, to an inertial frame. And hence there was this need to represent the orientation of the B frame relative to the A frame in a very compact and nice manner. And I took a while to talk about the usefulness of simplifying notation, significance of simplifying notations. So I took the example of the acceleration of a moving particle and showed how if one did not invoke vectors and cross products and so on, how ugly and messy the expressions for acceleration look vis-a-vis how neat and elegant and compact they do when we use vector notation and cross products and so on and so forth. So so the motivation therefore was to come up with a compact way to represent the difference in orientation between the A frame and the B frame. And then to do that, the first milestone, that was the starting point, that was the expedition that we were on in the previous lecture. And the first milestone along the way in that expedition was to jettison using the unit vector notation for representing vectors, but and adopt matrices. So to represent a vector in terms of a column matrix instead of a unit vector. So instead of px x cap plus py y cap plus pz z cap, we chose to represent it as px py pz. Okay, this we noticed did not make any change to the the operations of vector addition and vector multiplication of a scalar with a vector, because when you add two column vectors, column matrices, the rules of addition are exactly the same as what you would have when you add two vectors represented with a unit vector notation. So scalar multiplication also is true. And there is one other fact that I forgot to mention. So if you have qx, qy, qz as a second vector, the dot product of these two vectors by definition is px qx plus py qy plus pz qz. It's a scalar. And the same dot product can be obtained by undertaking this p transpose q. So multiplying the transpose of this matrix with that matrix also gives me the same sum that I have here. So there already exists, we can define very readily the dot product between two vectors using the product rule as defined for matrices. Then with these we defined the rotation matrix rotation matrix of a B frame with respect to A frame was essentially the concatenation or juxtaposition, placing one beside another 3 column vectors and making a 3 by 3 matrix out of it. The first column vector was the representation of the unit vector along the B frame along the x-axis in the A frame. That was the first column. The second column was the unit vector along the y-axis represented in the A frame, and the unit vector along the z-axis represented in the A frame. So these 3 by 1 unit vectors were placed one beside another to make this matrix RAB, which was a very compact representation of the orientation relationship between the reference frame B and reference frame A. In other words, if I resolve the components of any vector, it could be velocity vector, acceleration vector, force vector, etc. in the B frame, what is its representation in the A frame? I can obtain that by multiplying that velocity vector or acceleration vector with this rotation matrix. So then we talked about elementary rotations about x, y, or z axes, and we defined them as Rx of theta, Ry of theta, Rz of theta. We just wanted to build familiarity with rotation matrices, so we wrote out the expressions for that. And finally, we talked about the properties of rotation matrices. Rotation of matrix of one frame with respect to itself is an identity matrix. Rotation of B with respect to A is a rotation of A with respect to B inverse, and then rotation about a certain axis by the sum of 2 angles, theta 1 and theta 2, is the product of rotations about the same axis by angle theta 1 and angle theta 2. This could be z, or this could be x or y or any other axis. Then we also had from this relationship that rotation by minus theta is the inverse of rotation by theta. And finally, we had this relation that rotation of A with respect to B was actually equal to the rotation of B with respect to A transpose. And a matrix that satisfies this relationship is called as a unitary matrix. Unitary matrix is a more general matrix which not only satisfies this, but I mean, if the entries of the matrix are complex entities, then the transpose conjugate of that matrix would be equal to the matrix itself. That's called as a unitary matrix. When you don't have complex entries, you don't have complex numbers as entries of the matrix, then such a matrix is also called as a orthogonal matrix. So this is therefore a unitary matrix / orthogonal. They are synonymous when it comes to real entries. They are also orthogonal. I mean, the orthogonality is also evident from the definition here. It's comprised of 3 columns which are orthogonal to one another and orthonormal to one another. Their magnitudes are unity and they are orthogonal to one another. Okay, so let us continue from where we left off. Please don't view all these properties that I'm writing as just one damn thing after another. So without any rhyme or rhythm, I'm presenting all of this. In fact, they would be used at one point or another in this lecture and the later lecture. So that's one reason why I'm taking the trouble to show these to you. The second is that we would be, rotation matrices, Euler angles are one of the important takeaways from this course. So I just want to take some time, therefore, to write out some of the properties, some of which may not be used as often, but nevertheless are important because rotation matrices are important in connection with analysis of rigid body dynamics. So the next property concerns the eigenvectors and the eigenvalues of this matrix, of a rotation matrix. So eigenvalues and eigenvectors of a rotation matrix or a unitary matrix, whichever way you want to, of a unitary matrix. Okay. So it turns out that since R of B with respect to A is a unitary matrix, I shall not provide the proof here. It has 3 eigenvalues, of which the first eigenvalue always is 1. One of the eigenvalues is always 1, and the other eigenvalue is of the form e to the power I theta, and the third eigenvalue is its complex conjugate, e to the power minus I theta. What is theta here? Theta is, of course, related to, just as eigenvalues are dependent on the entries of a matrix generally, So is theta. It's dependent on the entries of the matrix. It's given by cos inverse of the trace of this matrix. In other words, the sum of the entries of the diagonals. So I'll call this R11 plus R12 plus R22 plus R33. Okay, minus 1 divided by 2. Okay, that is theta. It's a complicated expression, not physically apparent exactly right away what meaning this has. Just remember that there is this interesting mathematical property that RAB has, these three eigenvalues. Two of them are purely are complex numbers, e to the power I theta, e to the power minus I theta, and the other one is 1. So always you have 1 as an eigenvalue for this matrix. So what that means, therefore, is that there is a vector u, which when multiplied by this matrix R of B with respect to A gives me back u. Now, the other eigenvectors also I can, you can obtain it by solving this equation, the exact structure for u. I don't want to do that because it's all just straightforward algebra. The other vectors are going to have complex components, entries, complex entries. So I don't want to do that. I just wanted to stop with simply pointing out that a unitary matrix such as R of B with respect to A has 1 as its eigenvalue always, and other two eigenvalues would be dependent on the entries of that matrix, entries along the diagonal of that matrix, and this is nothing but cos inverse of trace of A, trace of R minus 1 divided by 2. Okay, so this is a useful fact, and we shall return to its utility. At the moment, it may look mystifying, and you may not be able to relate this to whatever would be, we would be discussing in rigid body dynamics. But we will return to this soon, and you will see how relevant and useful it is. Then the other, property that I wanted to, I don't want to say property, other interpretation of the rotation matrix is one of a rotation operator. Okay, so what is a rotation operator? Rotation operator is an operator which operates upon a certain vector and changes the orientation of that vector. So in complex numbers, if I have a complex number z, you must have come across this in your complex analysis course. If I were to multiply this complex number z with a term of the kind e to the power I theta, what does that term e to the power I theta do? What it does is it rotates this complex number z. So this is real part of z and this is the imaginary part of z. The complex number e to the power I theta rotates the complex number z to a new configuration, okay, z1, which is oriented with respect to z by this angle theta. So therefore, I would call this e to the power I theta as a rotation operator because it has this effect of rotating this complex number by the angle theta. Okay, so similarly, one interpretation of this rotation matrix R is that it's a rotation operator in 3 dimensions. What do we mean by that? So all along, we have viewed the rotation matrix as simply a set of 9 numbers that relate the B coordinate frame with the A coordinate frame. But let us take, for example, 2 vectors, 1, 0, 0, and maybe 1 by root 2, 1 by root 2, 0. Let us take these 2 vectors. Okay. Just by staring at these 2 vectors, can you say which reference frame I am representing these vectors in? No. Unlike in the unit vector notation where I had x cap b or x cap a telling me exactly which frame it is that I'm resolving my vectors in, here there is really no information about what frame it is that I'm representing this vector and that vector. May be the same, may not be the same, depending on whether they are in different coordinate systems or they are in the same coordinate system. So 1, 0, 0 is a vector along the x-axis in the A coordinate system. It could be interpreted as a vector along the x-axis in the A coordinate system. YA, ZA. And 1 by root 2, 1 by root 2, 0 can be interpreted as the representation of the same vector in a coordinate system that is rotated with respect about the z-axis by 45 degrees or so. So if I were to define xb this way and yb that way, and zb aligned with the za axis, in that coordinate frame, 1 by root 2, 1 by root 2, 0 is the representation of the same vector, 1, 0, 0, and it's represented differently in the new coordinate frame. Alternately, if I don't bring in the second coordinate frame at all, okay, 1 by root 2, 1 by root 2, 0 is an entirely new vector, which is at 45 degrees to the x and y axes and in the plane of the xa frame. So this is 1 by root 2, 1 by root 2, 0. Okay. Now I know that if I multiply this 1, 0, 0 vector with a rotation matrix, okay, about the z-axis by an angle of 45 degrees, I will get this particular vector, right? Already. Therefore, one way to interpret the rotation matrix is that it contains information that allows me to properly resolve the components of a vector represented in the V frame to the and resolve the components properly in the A frame. That's one interpretation. The second interpretation is that in case I did not have the B frame at all, okay, I forget about two frames now for briefly, then I can view this rotation matrix also as a rotation operator which took this vector, 1, 0, 0, and rotated it by 45 degrees about the z-axis. Okay, this is another interpretation that is possible for the rotation matrix. This is not a very useful interpretation for us right now, although at times it's this particular interpretation will make analysis easy, and therefore I am putting it out there before we proceed with discussing today's content, namely Euler angles. Any questions about this? Okay, so the rotation matrix, Raghuraman Sheshadri, yes?
Sir, I didn't understand that second interpretation about rotational matrix.
Well, I mean, the second interpretation is the following. By looking at these two vectors, 1, 0, 0 and 1 by root 2, 1 by root 2, 0, there is nothing in the representation that tells you which coordinate frame they are in. Okay, is that okay? Now, yeah, for all you know, I may be referring to two vectors in the same coordinate system, A coordinate system, in which case there are two distinct vectors, 1, 0, 0 aligned along the x-axis and 1 by root 2, 1 by root 2 rotated by 45 degrees with respect to it. Okay. Now, multiplying 1, 0, 0 by this matrix, Rz of 45 degrees, will give me 1 by root 2, 1 by root 2, 0. You agree with me?
Yes.
So what I'm therefore doing is I'm using this matrix to go from this vector to that vector. So this matrix is therefore acting as a rotation operator, which is taking one vector, operating upon it, which in this case is multiplying that vector with this rotation matrix, and giving me a new vector which is of the same magnitude, but rotated with respect to the first vector by this angle 45 degrees. Okay. So right now, therefore, we are not viewing Rz as relating two coordinate frames which are rotated with respect to one another by z 45 degrees. Instead, we are viewing it as an operator which is taking a vector in the A frame itself and giving me another vector in the A frame itself, but which is oriented at a certain angle, in this case 45 degrees with respect to the first one. That's all.
Okay.
Okay. Abhishek Kar had a question.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to ask, in the previous lecture, you couldn't tell us about one more property towards the end because of internet issues. So is this the other property or is that a separate thing?
Well, I think the last property, probably I'll get to it now. Whatever I couldn't tell, I will get to it now. Okay.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Dinesh Kumar Agarwal had a question.
Sir, this last property, Rz 45 degree, it means this is a one rotational operator. So it rotates the original vector 1, 0, 0 to a 45 degree. That's it only, sir?
Exactly.
So this is just
any other vector also, you not necessarily just 1, 0, 0.
Okay. Means this is one rotational operator. that okay, resultant vector, whatever we are getting, 1 by root 2, 1 by root 2, this same frame, but this original vector is rotated to 45 degrees. This is that much only,
exactly.
sir.
Exactly. It is rotated by 45 degrees. That's how,
So
that's
we-
the other
so-
function that this rotation matrix can form. That can,
And we can assume like that is it a same vector in another coordinate frame.
if it's another coordinate frame, then the rotation matrix can be viewed as relating the orientation of that coordinate frame with respect to this coordinate frame. In that case, for example, 1, 0, 0 could be just a single vector alone. In this case, we took two vectors, right? We, if it was the same frame, 1, 0, 0 and 1 by root 2, 1 by root 2, 0 are two different vectors altogether. But if 1, 0, 0 is the representation of a vector in the B frame, the same vector represented in the A frame could be 1 by root 2, 1 by root 2, 0 if the two frames are rotated with respect to one another by 45 degrees. That's the second interpretation.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Sir,
So Nikhil,
sir,
yeah.
so one actually, sir, whenever you complete one topic, if you give 1 or 2 minute time, so we can note down all these things and immediately we can revise after lecture. So
Okay.
just
Okay.
1 or 2 minutes, if you give it, we immediately, I think most of the person will note down. Once
Okay.
you complete one topic and then immediately note down, and it will help us in revising that immediately after lecture actually.
Okay. Okay.
Sir, I mean, or you can just click the photos of these notes and just send us after the lecture, sir. So we
I can do
review
that
it.
also. Yeah. I can send
I-
that. So
yeah,
Dinesh
and-
Kumar Agarwal is done.
Yeah, sir, done.
Nikhil Kumar Paliwal.
Sir, I have a question regarding the direction, sir. Is it a specific direction in the we have to take regarding the theta?
Yes, it is counterclockwise is positive. The right hand thumb screw rule that we have taught, right? That's the convention.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Mukund Mitra.
Sir, I have a doubt that, sir, is every rotation matrix, sir, it can be represented as a e to power iota theta form or somewhat?
Well, every rotation matrix, can it be represented in the form of e to the power I theta, is it?
Yes, sir. Sir, in the above you have written, if we multiply e raised to the iota theta, the coordinate.
No, this was an example that was not related to whatever we were discussing here. I discussed this in the context of complex numbers. Okay. To point out that in the world of complex numbers, which has nothing to do with the world we are in right now,
Yes, sir.
e to the power I theta can be viewed as a rotation operator because it rotates a complex number by an angle theta.
Okay. Sir.
That's the only analogy that for which I use it. But nevertheless, it's also possible to represent a rotation matrix as an exponent of something else. We will not be discussing that in this course. It's outside this course, but it's still possible to represent a rotation matrix e to the power some other matrix times theta. We'll not talk about that though here.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Mukund Mitra.
Yes, sir. No, sir. Means my question is that one.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. I didn't know that. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So now we will talk about visualizing this rotation matrix better. Okay. What is a general rotation matrix? It has 9 elements, right? I shall just write these 9 elements: R12, R13, R21, R22, R23, R31, R32, R33. Now, do we really need to carry around? Of course, we have packaged away these 9 elements very well by putting them, seating them at the appropriate locations in a 3x3 matrix. That's great. But do we really need these 9 elements to completely define this matrix? Is it really necessary? Well, the answer to this question is that it's really not necessary, because you need to remember that this is just the concatenation of 3 unit vectors, right? So one is x cap of b with respect to a, the other is y cap of b with respect to a, the third is z cap of b with respect to a. So these 3 column vectors. I put them side by side and I make these 3 vectors. And since these are unit vectors, their magnitudes have to be equal to 1. So this is 1 unit vector. These are the 3 components of x cap of b in the a coordinate system, right? But x cap of b has a magnitude of 1, no matter in what coordinate system I resolve it into its components. Therefore, I need to have one condition to be met, namely that R11 square plus R21 square plus R31 square is equal to 1. Okay. The same kind of condition needs to be met also by the other 3 columns, entries to the other 3 columns. R12 square plus R22 square plus R32 square is also equal to 1, because y cap b is also a unit vector. and its magnitude is given by this particular term here, and that also has to be equal to R31 square plus R32 square plus R33 square. They should all be equal to 1 in magnitude. So I have 3 constraints already. So although I might have 9 entries here, those 9 entries have to obey 3 constraints. So I already have, I only have handle over 6 independent entries. But there are further restrictions. No matter what reference frame I resolve x cap of b and y cap of b into, since these 2 vectors were initially orthogonal, they will be orthogonal regardless of the reference frame in which I represent them. So I would therefore have that x cap b dot y cap b has to be equal to x cap b dot z cap b, which should be equal to y cap b dot z cap b, and all of them should be equal to 0, because these are all orthogonal to one another regardless of which frame. In this case it is the A frame, but regardless of which frame I choose to represent it, they should be equal to 0 in all the frames. Okay. Now what does that mean? What is the dot product of x cap b and y cap b? I hope you remember from your linear algebra course that a dot product of 2 vectors is R11 times R12 plus R21 times R22 plus R31 times R32. So the x component gets multiplied with the x component, and etc., and the 3 are added. So this is the dot product of x cap of b represented in the A frame with the y cap of b represented in the A frame. Okay. So this similarly has to be equal to R12 times R13 plus R22 times R23 plus R32 times R33, which in turn should be equal to R11 times R13 plus R21 times R23 plus R31 times R33. All of these terms have to go to 0. Okay. So therefore, the magnitudes of these 3 vectors have to be equal to 1 imposes 3 constraints. And the dot products of the columns of these matrix have to all go to 0, imposes 3 more constraints, which means that of these 9 elements have to satisfy 6 constraints. And that leaves me with only 3 numbers that I can choose independently. Okay, the others all get frozen if I choose these 3 numbers on account of the 6 equations, the 6 constraint equations that these numbers have to satisfy. Now, the question now is, shall we simply settle for representing the orientation difference between B and A by simply specifying these 3 numbers? Or shall we do more? Shall we make this representation of orientation difference more intuitive, more human and easy for us to imagine? If we were just working with a computer, if it was a computer that was worried about representation of orientation, it wouldn't matter. This visualization or picturization of the orientation difference would be of academic interest, would be irrelevant actually, if we were talking about a computer, doing it. But we are talking of human beings, and we are also talking of, some actions that we need to take based on our picturization of these orientations. For example, if an aircraft is coming towards me from a certain direction, and I know the the R rotation matrix for that, I want to be able to tell in what direction and by how much I need to turn my anti-aircraft gun to shoot it down. So I need to be able to take some action based on the information that is made available to me through the rotation matrix. So given that, it is really not convenient, not intuitive for us to simply settle for representing the rotation difference between the frames A and B by simply some 3 numbers. If I were to put some number here, 0.5 and 0.25 and 0.125 or some such thing, let us say, as those 3 independent entries, what sense will that make to you? You're an engineer and I've given you these 3 numbers. What sense can you make out of that about the relative orientation of frame B with respect to frame A? It's a very difficult thing to imagine. It's possible that I can come up with all the 9 entries, but even then I'll be as much in the dark about how B is related with respect to A as an engineer as I would earlier, right? So we are seeking therefore a more intuitive and easy to imagine way of relating the rotation of B with respect to the rotation of the coordinate frame A. Okay, so the first important and perhaps the most easy to understand and elegant result that we can exploit in our quest to humanize the rotation matrix in some sense is to invoke what is known as Euler's rotation theorem. Okay, a very neat and elegant theorem, but not very practical, but a very worthwhile starting point for our effort. I hope the quest is clear. Why we are undertaking this quest is clear, and this quest is going to define the rest of the lecture today. So I want to be sure that the motivation is clear. 3 numbers, along with 6 constraints, make not much sense to us mere mortals. So we want to therefore come up with easily, a more easy representation of the rotation matrix, so that we can relate the, we can imagine how B might be oriented if I were to give you those 3 numbers instead of these 3, R11, R12, and R13. Okay, the first is therefore Euler's rotation theorem. I shall just state the theorem. Okay, so the theorem is the following: there always exists a vector k cap and an angle theta such that rotation of A about the vector k cap by an angle theta.
Sir, going down
Yes.
page.
Sorry. Yes, by an angle theta gives us the B frame. So it's the statement might look very lengthy, but if you were to picture it, let us say I have 2 frames, A and B, XA, YA, ZA, and a second frame, I'm drawing it here, XB, YB, ZB, oriented in some random fashion with respect to the first frame. What is extremely striking and interesting about this result is that I can always find a certain vector. Okay, if I were to rotate the frame A about that vector by this angle theta, I can always find an angle theta and a vector K, such that if I were to rotate the frame A about that vector in just a single rotation, I will be able to move from frame A to frame B. I don't need to have multiple rotations. In just a single rotation, by rotating about that axis, I can go from frame A to frame B. Okay, so this is called Euler's rotation theorem. Okay, you might wonder, well, see, you talked about how rotation matrices have 3 independent entries, and now you are talking about a vector k and an angle theta, just 2 entries. So how is it that the fact that 3 independent entries in the rotation matrix is preserved in this kind of an operation? You might wonder that, but you need to remember that this vector k has 3 components: kx, ky, kz. So 3 independent things that I can choose, but because we are talking about a direction, really we are talking about an axis about which we are rotating, we're not really concerned about the magnitude of this. So we have one constraint, namely that kx square plus ky square plus kz square is equal to 1. We'll take a unit vector, okay, which is pointed in a certain, there always exists a unit vector, in 3D, and if I were to rotate the frame A about that unit vector by an angle theta, in one shot I will get frame B. That's the conclusion of Euler's rotation theorem. Very elegant, very neat. Okay. So this is therefore, I have 3 entries here with 1 constraint, so 2 independent entries here, and then there is the theta, angle theta. So which is a third independent entry. So I can fully define my rotation matrix by using these 3 independent entries. These 4 independent entries along with this one constraint equation, and compared to the previous representation with 3 numbers, 3 direction cosines, you can clearly see that this is a more intuitive picture, right? So how am I able to get to frame B starting from frame A? There is an axis. I have to find that axis. But if I do find that axis, all I need to do is I have to rotate it by an angle theta, and I will get the frame B. So I can imagine therefore the two to be rotated with respect to this particular axis in 3D, okay, by an angle theta. Now let us take an example to illustrate the application of this theorem. So for example, let us consider our rotation matrix to be a simple matrix, Rz of theta. What is that? That's equal to cos theta, sin theta 0 minus sin theta, cos theta 0, 0, 0, 1. That's our rotation matrix. Okay, and we know that this is what this rotation matrix relates two frames rotated about z axis by an angle theta. So YA and ZA is out of the plane of the paper, and XB, YB, and ZB is rotated out of the plane of the paper. Now I am tasked with finding that axis K cap, okay, about which I need to rotate the XA YA frame by the angle theta to get the XB YB frame. Now what is that axis? It's obvious in this case. It's just a Z axis, right? So I just need to, my K axis here is evident by by just examination. I know that I have to rotate about the Z axis. Similarly, if I have XA and ZA, okay, and I rotate about theta to get rotate by angle theta to get XB and ZB, then the rotation matrix will be Ry of theta, okay, and I know that for this Ry of theta, which will have a certain structure which I have written out in the previous class, I don't want to repeat it here, that vector K about which I need to rotate, okay, in order to rotate by an angle theta, in order to take reference frame A to reference frame B, is the Y vector. Okay, so what you see as a common observation in our inspection based discovery of this K vector for these two particular rotation matrices is that in both cases, these two vectors have the same representation in the Y frame, in the B frame, as well as in the A frame, right? So what is the representation of the Z vector in the A frame? It is 0, 0, 1. And if this particular vector is acted upon by Rz, I still get 0, 0, 1. You can just cross multiply and see. I still get 0, 0, 1. In other words, this rotation matrix leaves this vector unaffected. So that is our clue. So what is this axis about which I need to rotate? It is that axis which when operated upon by the rotation matrix stays put, remains unchanged, remains unaffected. That is our empirical observation from these two examples that we have taken here. Is that clear? It's an empirical observation, but we can do much more than simply blindly make this observation. If instead of viewing, briefly we were to instead view the rotation operator as view the matrix as a rotation operator instead of something that connects two reference frames, then what is this matrix doing? It is taking a vector, okay. Let us say I have Rz of theta operating any vector in the XA YA frame and ZA frame by Rz of theta is effectively equal to rotating the whole vector by an angle theta about the Z axis. So clearly when you are rotating about the Z axis, you know that the Z axis vector itself will remain unchanged. The axis of rotation itself will have to remain unchanged if I am rotating about that particular axis, right? So therefore, it is evident that that particular mysterious K vector, which determines the axis about which I have to rotate, so that in one shot I can get from the A coordinate frame to the B coordinate frame, is nothing but that vector which remains invariant under this rotation operation. Okay, this when I were to operate upon that vector by this matrix Rz, I should get back the same vector. In other words, Rz, R times, if R of B with respect to A is the general rotation matrix we are talking about now, no longer just the simple ones that elementary rotations about x or y axis, but a general rotation matrix with 9 entries, then that vector k about which I need to rotate to go from B to A has to satisfy R times k cap is equal to k cap, right? Based on our observations for a simplified case, we expect the same to be true for the more general rotation matrix R of B with respect to A. I have to rotate it about such a k cap that when I operate, when I try to rotate k cap by using this rotation matrix, it should stay unchanged. It should not get affected. Its component should not change. And therefore, I should get back k cap. Now, if you see this equation, stare at it for a while. Okay, this is a simple eigenvalue eigenvector problem. Okay, so in linear algebra, an eigenvalue problem is one where you have to find a vector u and a scalar lambda such that au is equal to lambda u. And look at this equation here. It's no different in structure. I don't want to say au because I may confuse notations. Let us invent some other notation for a matrix. I'll call it m or something. Mu is equal to lambda u. Same equation. What is lambda? It's already determined for us. Lambda is equal to 1. And we know that a rotation matrix has 1 as its eigenvalue, right? So, therefore, that k vector is not a mysterious vector. It is the eigenvector of the rotation matrix R of B with respect to A corresponding to the eigenvalue lambda equal to 1. I just need to solve the set of algebraic equations given by R of AB times k is equal to k to get the components of the k vector. Okay, and theta, what is theta? Very interestingly, if you go back to the discussion that we had a few minutes back, we wrote out the other eigenvalues to be of the kind e to the power I theta, right? Where theta was equal to cos inverse of the trace of that matrix R minus 1 divided by 2. I had written that some time back, right? There was no physical meaning at that point that we could attach to theta, but immediately now I hope you are able to see the physical meaning. So this theta essentially encapsulates, contains within it the angle by which I have to rotate about this k cap vector to go from frame A to frame B. Okay, so Euler therefore has provided us with one very intuitive and easy to imagine way of going from frame A to frame B that doesn't require us to remember some 3 arbitrary numbers R11, R12 and R13. I can instead imagine going from frame A to frame B by rotating frame A about a certain vector in a certain direction by a single in one shot by a single angle theta. Yes, Mukund Mitra has a question.
Yes, sir. Sir, here in this case, we have taken the eigenvalue as 1. So, sir, we are left with 2 more eigenvalues. So what I'm saying that means there can be multiple k vector, no? Means for different eigenvalues, we will get different value of k vectors, means different sort.
Correct.
So,
but what you see here is that the other 2 eigenvalues are complex numbers. Okay. So we are talking about real world, right? Xa, Ya, Za are all real numbers. Okay. Yes, you have 2 more eigenvectors. I agree with you. But those eigenvectors will correspond to this particular complex number as its eigenvalue. And therefore, the entries of those vectors will themselves be complex numbers. They have no physical meaning.
Okay. Yes, sir. Okay, sir.
So there's only one that you will not have multiple real numbers, real vectors. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Ajinkya Kazod, yeah, please, Ajinkya.
I had a question that how can we use this theta expression right here to rotate vector k?
No, you have to rotate. I'm providing this without proof. That's why. Okay. So you can look up standard textbooks about why this is true. But I'm just stating that if e to the power I theta is one of the eigenvalues of the matrix R of B with respect to A, then the angle by which I need to rotate to get from A frame to B frame is theta. I'm just stating it without providing proof. Okay. Yeah. If you want proof, maybe I can give you reference at some later point for some linear algebra book or whatever that proves this more rigorously.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, Manoj.
Sir, here R B2A is the complete direction cosine matrix, like right? RZ, RY, RX multiplication, then we get this RB2A, and from there we are finding this eigenvector.
Correct. Yes. That's it. Yeah, Dhanashri.
Sir, in this case, here the means the rotation axis does not change. This is a must condition, correct?
Yes.
If we consider a rotation in case of gyroscopic action, so it won't be represented by this matrix transformation because there the axis of rotation itself rotates.
Well, I don't know exactly what your question is, but what do you mean by when you use this in terms of gyroscopic rotation? Can you please elaborate?
Sir, you said here the axis about which we are considering the rotation that should remain the fixed. So
that should remain, the representation of that should be the same in both B and A frames. Correct.
Okay. Okay, sir. I was thinking
It has nothing to do with the gyroscope.
No, sir. If the axis of rotation doesn't remain fixed, so we cannot apply this.
No, we are not talking of a dynamics problem here. We are just trying to relate two coordinate frames. Okay. So we are just stating that there exists a certain axis about which if I rotate, I can go from one frame to another. Okay. So this has nothing to do with a fixed frame of a fixed rotation axis as there would be in case of gyroscopes and so on. So I don't immediately see the connection with gyroscopes.
Okay.
All right. Let us now proceed. So as elegant and easy as this is, Dinesh Kumar Agarwal, yes?
Sir, actually, we are finding a vector. I just want to just clarify my doubt. We are finding a vector. This is so that we can rotate a vector. So that we can rotate a vector to find out that how much degree is aligned.
Well, we are finding a vector. The point here is we are trying to find a vector about which if I rotate, I can take frame A to frame B.
Okay. We are finding a fixed vector about which we can rotate so we can get another vector.
We can go from frame A to frame B. So if I were to take this XYZ frame of XYZ axis of A, and about this axis I rotate by an angle theta, this set of XYZ axis will coincide with the set with the XYZ axis of B vector, the B frame.
Okay, sir, got it. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Malleshwar Rao.
Sir.
Yeah.
Sir, is it possible always that rotation operator get the eigenvalue as 1?
Yes, that's a standard theorem in linear algebra. Unitary matrices always have always have 1 as an eigenvalue, and you can prove it also. I don't want to.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Bye. Okay. So as easy as this was, I know sometimes the ending point for a mathematician's work turns out to be the starting point for an engineer. The engineer takes the mathematician's work and tries to put it into practical use. And when an engineer tries to put it into practical use, an engineer would have probably appealed to Euler to help him out because he's not able to visualize this rotation entries or this rotation matrix, and Euler would have, I'm just making it up, of course, Euler would come up with this very neat way of instead visualizing the rotation matrix in terms of this vector k cap and an angle theta. But then the engineer will go back to him and tell him, well, this is all nice and fine, but how can I rotate about this about this general axis k cap by this general angle theta? See, if I'm an engineer, let us say I'm making a robot or I have an aircraft whose orientation I want to control. I can only control the orientation by using an appropriate actuator, generally only about one axis, right? You have a motor, I can rotate the motor about one axis. You have spherical motors, but they are not in everyday use. You only have motors that rotate about a single axis. Therefore, I need to put 3 motors at some angles with respect to one another to get a general orientation in 3D. Now, if the pointing direction of this motor is not aligned along this k cap vector to start with, then I'm doomed. I cannot go from frame A to frame B at all, right? So in my practical realization, whether I'm flying an aircraft or whether I'm controlling a robotic manipulator or whatever, the way I construct these hardware, these instruments and machines and so on are such that I can control orientation about one axis by using a single actuator. And I integrate 3 different such actuators along 3 different axes to get 3, to be able to rotate this particular rigid body in whatever direction I want. So while it is all well and good that there is this k cap vector and theta vector, it is not useful to me as an engineer because I don't know how to connect this k cap and theta to the angles by which I should spin my 3 motors, or the angles by which I should rotate my aircraft about the roll, pitch, and yaw axis to get to the orientation of the B frame that I want. So an engineer would go back to Euler with that kind of a question, to which Euler would come up with an equally clever and far more useful solution. And I'm putting that here now. I'll first write down the statement, and then we will talk about how that can be expanded upon. So any rotation matrix R of B with respect to A can be represented as rotations, elementary rotations, let me put it that way, about 3 linearly independent vectors. Actually, this statement, in my opinion, is not strictly true, but I wish to discuss it with Professor Ghoshal later. But my feeling is this should be changed. It should not be. This is sufficient, but not necessary. By three vectors, where the next vector is linearly independent with the previous vector. Is linearly independent from the previous vector. This is, in my opinion, both necessary and sufficient. But I wish to discuss this with someone who would know these things better before I confirm it. But we'll just look at the first statement itself. Okay, any rotation matrix R of B with respect to A can be represented as elementary rotations about 3 linearly independent vectors. Okay, so now I have 3 motors, and now Euler has told me that I can have 3 linearly independent vectors, and I can rotate about by appropriate angles about these 3 independent vectors, and still also go from the A frame to the B frame instead of rotating about this strange direction k cap, which I cannot realize in practice given the 3 motors that I have. I can instead rotate it along 3 specific directions and by certain other angles and get the same, go from A frame to the B frame. Okay, so how do we pick these 3 vectors about which we rotate to go from the B frame to the A frame? Well, to start with, as engineers, we might want to go with simplicity. Okay, so let us say we have the XA, YA, ZA frame. Now, to get to XB, ZB, YB, ZB frame, let us say I first rotate about the x-axis by a certain angle. So if I rotate about the x-axis, I get this particular orientation for that next frame. So I need to rotate, let us say, by some angle theta x. Okay, then I rotate about the y-axis. These are my 3 linearly independent vectors that I have picked. They are fixed. Okay, about y-axis by theta y, and about z axis by theta z. If I were to do this, and if I were to properly relate theta x, theta y, theta z to the entries of my rotation matrix R of B with respect to A, then I would have found those 3 angles by which I should rotate in order to go from frame A to frame B. Okay, so frame B might have some orientation like this. Okay, so I'm rotating about 3 fixed vectors. Okay, so this kind of convention of going from frame A to frame B by rotating about 3 fixed axes is called as X, Y, Z fixed angle convention. Now, the word fixed doesn't apply to the to the word angle, but instead applies to the axis XYZ. XYZ fixed, so XYZ is not changed. You know, I have the A frame, and I'm rotating about the axis of the A frame to go from the A frame to the B frame. This is one way in which I can realize the three vectors. Notice that Euler did not say that these three vectors have to be orthogonal to one another. He just said that they need to be linearly independent. Okay, so I can pick any three other vectors also in the A frame which are linearly independent. In other words, they are not aligned in the same direction, and still be able to rotate by appropriate angles about those three axes and go from frame A to frame B. That's also possible. But as engineers, we don't find any meaning and use to doing that. It's of interest to a mathematician. But as engineers, this is definitely something that looks useful. But it turns out that this is not a very useful way of representing the rotation difference between the frames B and A. To prove my point, let me take the example of an aircraft. Okay. It is possible, this convention is possible, by the way. This is also intuitive and easy to imagine. Okay, instead of the three numbers, R11, R12, and R13, I now have three angles. Angles are always easy to visualize. I'm rotating about XA by theta X, by YA by theta Y, and ZA by theta Z to go from B to A. So go from A to B. But how practical is it? See, often as engineers, we don't want to just measure these angles, right? We want to do something with it. As I pointed out earlier, in the case of that anti-aircraft gun, we want to be able to now command our gun to point in a certain direction. So we want to take some control action from the information that we have got. So from that perspective, representing it using the particular convention I discussed earlier is not very useful. And I will illustrate that, as I said, by means of this aircraft example. Okay. So let us say aircraft is aligned along the x-axis. The longitudinal axis of the aircraft is along the x-axis. Okay, there's a wing here. Sorry, there's the tail there, and there's a wing here. Please pardon the neatness of my schematic. So this is YA, this is ZA, XA, and this is ZA. Okay. Now, let us say I want to rotate first about XA axis. Okay, maybe in this direction. Then let us first do that. Okay. How do I, effect rotations in the case of an aircraft? So to effect rotation about the longitudinal axis, I have two control surfaces, one on each side of the wing, which is called as an aileron, AILERON. So I apply a couple about the x-axis on the aircraft, aerodynamic couple, and I'm able to rotate about the x-axis. How can I rotate about the z-axis? I have something called as a rudder at the back, which allows me to rotate about the z-axis. How do I rotate about the y-axis? Something called as an elevator. Somewhere here at the back, elevator, whose inclination I can play around with to rotate about the y-axis. So it looks great, right? I mean, I want rotations about XA, YA, ZA axis in the previous convention, and here I am with three control surfaces which allow me to rotate about those exact axes. So I am good. I should be able to command, the plane to rotate if I to any rotation by to any new orientation as specified by the rotation matrix by adjusting these control surfaces. But as a pilot, I want to control only one surface at a time. I'm a human being. I want to control only one surface at a time. So let us say I do it sequentially. So let us say I first rotate about the x-axis. So I'm drawing the front view of the aircraft here. The wings will be seen from the edge, and this will be the YA axis, and this will be the ZA axis. Okay, this is how the aircraft is going to look from the front. And I first rotate I activate my ailerons, and then I rotate about the x-axis. So the flight is going to now look something like this. Okay, it's going to rotate by this angle theta x about the x-axis. I have done with the first rotation. Now the second rotation has to be about, if we were to go by the fixed angle convention, it has to be rotated about YA axis, right, by an angle theta y. But then, if you look at this, my aircraft itself has changed its orientation. Now my control surfaces for rotating about the y-axis are also rotated by a certain amount about the initial x-axis. Okay, so my elevators therefore are pointed in this direction. They're no longer horizontal, and therefore if I have to change the rotation, I can easily change the rotation only about this axis, this new axis of the elevator, not the original YA axis. So as a pilot, therefore, I would be very grateful if you tell me by what angle I need to change about this new axis rather than the older original YA axis, right? Because I can immediately then command my elevator to change by that particular angle and go from this particular orientation to a slightly different orientation. The same problem also would be confronted if I have to change the yaw using a rudder. Okay, if I have to change the yaw, I can no longer, the rudder is now no longer oriented along the ZA axis, but is now oriented along this particular direction. That's the direction of the rudder. So I will be able to, by actuating the rudder, I will be able to change orientation about that axis, this particular axis, not ZA axis. Therefore, it really, as a pilot, therefore, I would be grateful if you give me angles theta x, theta y, theta z, not with respect to the original XA, YA, ZA fixed axes, but instead with respect to these new axes. After I have rotated by theta x, I have a new y axis for the aircraft. And about that axis, if I tell you how much I need to rotate, I can do that by appropriately actuating my elevator. Similarly, about the new, I then move to a second orientation. About that new orientation, if I were to tell you how much to rotate about the z axis, I can do that effortlessly by providing an appropriate command to my rudder. Okay, so as an engineer, I would appreciate if these angles are with respect to these intermediate reference frames. Okay, so these angles which are measured with respect to these intermediate reference frames are the famous Euler angles. And I hope that through this example, you are convinced of the utility and the need for Euler angles vis-a-vis the other representations that we talked about earlier. Okay, so let me dispense with this example of the aircraft and just indicate the reference frames and how they change as a consequence of rotating by x, y, and z about these intermediate frames. So from XA, YA, ZA, I first rotate about the x-axis to go to an intermediate frame. I'll call it YB1 and call that ZB1. And since I'm rotating about the x-axis, the XB1 will be coincident with XA. So that's the first rotation. Angle is theta x. Next, I shall just copy, for the sake of clarity, only the rotated reference frame YB1, ZB1, and XB1. And now I rotate about the new y-axis by an angle theta y. That will cause the y vector to change by an angle theta y in the ZB1, XB1 plane, and the XB1 vector will also change by the same angle theta y, come down in that same plane to give me XB2 and ZB2. Okay, and ZB2 and YB1 and YB2 are coincident because that's the axis of rotation. Now, to get to the B frame, I start with the second reference frame, ZB2. I shall try to draw this reference frame parallel to ZB2, XB2, YB2. That's the second intermediate reference frame. From there, I rotate about the z-axis by an angle theta z to get, which rotates the xp vector by theta z in the xp-yb frame, and this vector by theta z also again. So this will become YB3, and that will be the final frame. This will be the B frame. So to go from A frame to B frame, I construct two intermediate scaffolds, two intermediate helping steps. Okay, so XB, YB, and ZB2 and ZB are coincident. I imagine, therefore, the rotational relationship between a general B frame and the A frame to be decomposable into elementary rotations about two other intermediate rotating intermediate frames, B1 and B2, which are obtained in the manner that I have shown here. And the three angles that I get in the process, the angles by which I have to rotate with respect to these intermediate frames, sometimes in textbooks are also called as moving frames, are called Euler angles. Okay, so how do we relate if I am given a certain rotation matrix R of B with respect to A? How do I break that down into the three angles theta x, theta y, and theta z that I need to achieve in order to go from frame A to frame B? Let us see that next. Abhishek Kar has a question.
Yes, sir. Actually, my question is these Euler angles. You're starting from the original frame, then rotating it by theta x, and then the new frame, you're rotating it by theta y about the new y axis.
Correct.
So why not rotate it about the original y axis or the original z axis?
It is possible. I mean, you can define your angles that way, no issues. Mathematically, you are still good. But I gave this example of the aircraft, right? So in this aircraft, the pilot can change the rotation about this new y-axis only by using his elevator, not about the old y-axis. So if he actuates the elevator, he can change the orientation about the new y-axis. So therefore, it will be of use to the pilot if I choose to represent theta x, theta y, theta z in this particular manner, vis-a-vis the rotations about fixed axis as I did in the previous example.
So it's fine to consider it in that way, but it's more practical to be doing it in this way.
Exactly, practical, yes.
Okay,
fine. Correct. Thank you. So we are talking of practicality all along because we're engineers, right? Okay. Now this particular thing is called as XYZ Euler angle. Okay, this you need to remember that rotation matrices do not commute. So rotating about x by an angle theta x, and then about y by an angle theta y, and then about z by an angle theta z is not identical to rotating about z first by an angle theta z, and then y by an angle theta y, and then x by the same angle theta x. So if I were to undertake the second set of rotations, I will get a totally different orientation for B compared to orientation that I would get if I were to rotate with x first, and so on and so forth. So the sequence x, y, z is very important. So we cannot simply stop with referring to a convention as just Euler angles. That's not enough. That's not sufficient. That's not complete in description. I have to say x, y, z Euler angles to talk about which is the first axis, which is the next axis, and which is the third axis. Of course, I could have chosen to first rotate by z axis, and then I would have got z, y, x Euler angles. Those numbers will be different from these numbers. But the pilot should know which one we are talking about, which control surface is he changing first. Okay, there can also be, for example, the other one, yx, z, or yzx, or whatever. Even those are possible. Even more esoteric ones are possible, and hopefully we will see that if we have time. Okay, now how do we relate the entries of the rotation matrix to this, the rotations theta x, theta y, theta z? In other words, given the rotation matrix, how do we obtain theta x, theta y, theta z? Okay, so if you see here, let us start with the last frame. If I have a representation of a particular vector in the B frame, then representation in the B1 frame is obtained by multiplying this P with the rotation matrix connecting B to B1. So rotation matrix of B with respect to B1 times PB will give me the representation of the vector in the B1 frame. And what is B1? What is this term? In order to go from B1 to B, I have rotated about z axis by an angle theta z. That's that number. Okay. Now, so this is B2 probably, not B1. Sorry, B2. B2. Now we have come to the next intermediate frame. From this equation, I have obtained the representation of the same vector in the B2 coordinate system. But I now need the representation in the B1 coordinate system, and I get that by multiplying this with the rotation matrix, which indicates the rotation of B1 with respect to B2, B2 with respect to B1. And this will give me P of B1, right? By definition of rotation matrices. And the last step is I can represent the same vector in the A frame by multiplying the representation in the B1 frame by the rotation matrix of B1 with respect to A, and to get the representation in the A frame. So therefore, I see that the representation of the A frame is R of A with respect to B1 times PB1. PB1 is R of B1 with respect to B2 and times PB2, and PB2 is R of B2 with respect to R of B with respect to B2 times PB. So if you see here, PA is equal to the product of these three matrices times PB. And by definition, this is nothing but R of B with respect to A. And each of these matrices happen to be elementary matrices. As we saw, P of R of B with respect to B2 was Rz of theta z. R of B1 with respect to B2, here I'm rotating about the y-axis by an angle theta y. So this has a very simple structure again, Ry of theta y. And the first element is Rx of theta x. And I've therefore decomposed the rotation matrix. I'll draw a long arrow so that I don't have to rewrite again. I've decomposed the rotation matrix into three constituent rotation matrices about x and y and z. If I were to expand this out, I will get an incredibly ugly expression, but I'll write it down anyway because it is important for estimating theta x, theta y, and theta z. So for the sake of simplicity, and reducing the length, I shall replace cos theta by c theta everywhere. Okay, when I say c theta, I mean cos theta. Similarly, sin theta will be replaced by s theta. It's a standard thing that is used by people in this community. So the first term is c theta y, c theta z, which is cos theta y times cos theta z. That's what this means. The second term is minus c theta y, s theta z, cos theta y times sin theta z. The last term is s theta y. And then the second term is s theta x, s theta y, s theta z, plus s theta z, c theta x. This entire thing is the second element in the first element in the second row. Then the second element is equally long, minus s theta x, s theta y, s theta z, plus c theta z, c theta x. The last element is minus s theta x, c theta y. And then the last row is minus c theta x, s theta y, c theta z, plus s theta z, s theta x. And then the second element is c theta x, s theta y, s theta z, plus c theta z, s theta x. Then c theta x, c theta y. This is the expression. Okay. Now I equate this, each of the entries here to the entries of that rotation matrix, R11, R12, R13, etc., etc. So from this you see that I can right away get theta y by looking at the expression here. S theta y is equal to R13. So theta y is sine inverse of R13. But this is a little misleading because theta y can assume different values and still give me the same sign. So sine of pi minus theta is sine theta, right? So if R13 is 1 by root 2, I don't know whether theta y is 45 degrees or 135 degrees. So to resolve that conflict, I look at this other two terms here. I have c theta y times c theta z and c theta y times minus s theta z. So c theta z square plus s theta z square is equal to 1, a trigonometric identity. Therefore, I would have that R11 square plus R12 square will be equal to c square theta, cos square theta. Or in other words, cos theta will be equal to square root of R11 square plus R12 square, cos theta y, sorry. So therefore, I know sin theta y to be equal to R13 and cos theta y to be equal to this. Okay. Again, here, when I take the square root, I could take either the positive square root or the negative square root, in which case I get two different values of theta. So if I take the positive square root, I get, let us say, 60 degrees. If I take the negative square root, I get 120 degrees. Okay. But if we all agree, if all the aircraft pilots in the world agree that they're going to look at theta y only between plus minus 90 degrees, then we can simply stick with the positive square root alone. Otherwise, in general, you will have one more set of theta y's. Okay. So to extract theta y from this, while being sensitive to the quadrant in which we are going to be located, we instead take the tan inverse of this term. So in MATLAB, there is a command called a tan 2, arc tan 2 of two numbers, and that gives you the tan inverse of a certain ratio. Okay, so here it will be r13 comma square root of r11 square plus r12 square, and that will be equal to theta y. That's the first thing that we can extract from this relationship. So given the three entities of rotation matrix, theta y is obtained from this particular expression. A tan 2, you can please look it up. What that means, it is tan inverse which is taken while being sensitive to the signs of these things. For example, if both these were negative, a regular tan inverse will give me the same ratio, but if both these are negative, then the actual theta will be located in the third quadrant and not in the first quadrant. So you should, this a tan 2 takes care of such possible errors. Okay, now if I know theta y, if you look at the first r11 and r12, I can, if theta y is known, I can get c theta z from r11, s theta z from r12, and from that I can get theta z also. And I shall write it here itself. Theta z is equal to a tan 2 of minus r12 divided by c theta y, comma r11 divided by c theta y. And theta x is evident obtained from these two expressions. I don't need to use all the messy and scary stuff in the middle. C theta x I can extract from these two. See, here I have c theta y times s theta x. Here c theta y times c theta x. I've already determined theta y. Therefore, these two expressions I can use to get sine of theta x and cos of theta x, and from that estimate theta x. Theta x is equal to a tan 2 of minus r21 times by c theta y, comma r33. Sorry, this is not r21, r32 divided by c theta y. Okay, so if I'm given a general rotation matrix R of B with respect to A, which is this particular term, I can now visualize this matrix in terms of these three Euler angles, theta x, theta y, theta z, and which are computed using these expressions here. Okay, so this is one set of Euler angles, x, y, z, x, etc., etc. You could see the arbitrariness in that. There is one more set of Euler angles which are a little counterintuitive, but nevertheless again appear naturally in the problem that we would take up. So the choice, as we discussed in the case of the aircraft, was a natural choice for the pilot. This particular convention, x, y, z or x, z, y Euler angles, were a natural choice. Similarly, if I have a top which is spinning about the z axis, this is the axis of spin. So I'm going to draw a top here. Not a very good schematic, but again, that's a top. It's spinning about this axis. This is the inertial frame, xa, ya, za. Okay, then the single most striking feature of this rotating top is its axis of rotation, right? So therefore, what I could do first to go from this A frame to the B frame, which is fixed to the spinning rigid body, this top, is to first obtain a plane which is normal to the, which is perpendicular to the axis of rotation. So there's a plane which is perpendicular to the axis of rotation. Or in other words, this axis of rotation will be the normal to that plane. And I find the intersection of that plane with the xa-ya plane. Okay, that intersection will give me a new axis. I shall call that as the xb1 axis. So as my first intermediate frame, I construct the first intermediate frame by obtaining the intersection of the plane perpendicular to the normal, perpendicular to the axis of rotation with the xa-ya frame, and this is theta x. Excuse me for a minute. The next frame is obtained by rotating about this new frame xp1 by an angle theta y, theta x. The first one was obtained by rotating about the ZA axis. So this is theta z. I should call this theta z. It's obtained by rotating about the ZA axis. That will give me xp1. And to go from xb1 to the b2 coordinate frame, I rotate about xp1 by this particular angle. I'll call this as theta x. Okay, so that will take me to a new coordinate frame whose z-axis is the axis of rotation and whose x-axis is xp1 and the y-axis is a new one, which is yb2. And this will be zb2 also. And the final step is to go from that frame to a frame that is fixed to the rigid body, which shares the same z-axis, but the xy axis are rotating with the rigid body, right? That's the B frame. Okay, so here to get from that ZB2 frame to the B frame, I have to rotate about the z-axis by a certain angle. This angle will change with time because it's spinning about that axis. But this, you see, is a natural choice of rotations that will take me from the B frame, from the A frame to the B frame in case of the problem of the spinning top. Here I have first rotated by the Z frame, by the Z axis. Then I have rotated by about the X axis. And the third, of course, the X axis is a new X axis, XB1. And the third I have rotated by, again, not the Y axis, but again the Z axis. But this time the Z axis is ZB2. So this set of Euler angles are called ZXZ Euler angles. Okay, so this will be once again RZ of theta Z. I should use two different values of theta here. I can call this theta Z1, another one is theta Z2. So this is RZ of theta Z2 times Rx of theta X times Rz of theta Z1. This is the way, this is going to be the rotation matrix, and I'll have a corresponding set of equations that that relate these three angles to the the entries of the rotation matrix. Manoj, I'll just finish with whatever I'm saying, and then I'll take your question. So so similarly, you can have other combinations. So what is counterintuitive here is that you're rotating about two z axes. So you would think, am I really able to get three independent rotations if I'm rotating about two z axes? Well, the answer to that question is, you see that the two z axes are not really the same. One z axis is ZA axis, the other z axis is ZB2 axis, and these two are linearly independent vectors. So it is still okay that we are satisfying Euler. We are taking three linearly independent vectors, ZA axis, XB1 axis, ZB2 axis, rotating about those three linearly independent vectors, and therefore I'll still be able to represent any general rotation of B with respect to A using these three linearly independent vectors. Okay, so this is a little counterintuitive, but it's sometimes natural. Sometimes a robotic arm or a wrist will have motors aligned along the z-axis. In between that, we'll have a motor aligned along the x-axis or a y-axis. So you will then use ZYZ Euler angles or something else. Okay, so you choose an appropriate convention which most naturally fits the dynamic problem that you are or kinematic problem that you are worried about. Okay, so you can show that by looking at these kinds of combinations. You cannot have ZX. That's not permitted, because when you rotate about Z and again rotate about Z, when you rotate about Z the first time, the Z axis remains unchanged. So the second rotation will again be about the same axis. So these will be these two will not be two different vectors. So you will not be able to get any rotation in 3D with this kind of a sequence. But if you have sequences like this, where the next one is linearly independent from the previous one, that's enough. You will be able to represent a general 3D rotation of B with respect to A. And you can show that there are 12 such combinations, X, Y, Z, X, Z, Y, etc., then Z, X, Z, Y, Z, Y, etc., etc. So 12 Euler angle conventions are possible, and which one you pick is something that is, it's a choice that is cannily made by the engineer based on the problem at hand, based on the system that he wants to control, and the way the coordinate system is defined for that particular robot or system that he's trying to control. Okay, so there are problems with the Euler angles which are called singularities or gimbal lock. Unfortunately, we are past the time today, so we shall briefly discuss them in the next lecture before talking about how to use rotation matrices to write down the relationships between velocity in the A frame, velocity in the B frame, and so on and so forth. So at this point, we'll stop the class. As I said, as a reminder again, kindly register. Those who are contemplating registering for this course, kindly do so before the end of the day today, or even earlier if possible, because I don't know when the registration portal closes. And then I'll be posting a homework tomorrow to you guys. And lecture notes, as I said, given that my lectures, the content of my lectures is decided only at the last minute. It gets frozen only at the last minute. Whatever I put effort writing before that will often have to be heavily edited before I can share it with you. So I shall therefore request your permission to and your patience as far as sending the lecture notes is concerned. That's not going to hurt you too much because Yogesh has been diligently uploading the recordings of these lectures. So the same material will be available to you in the video form. That was not the case if this was a regular classroom lecture, but now that's not true. So that advantage is there for you. So I will send out the notes whenever I have them ready, but not immediately. Yeah, that's it. The others who have to go to other classes can leave now. I can answer questions that people may have. So we'll start with Manoj.
Sir, actually, I had this request about the singularity and gimbal lock, which you already mentioned. We'll cover next class. So actually, I'm done and I have to leave. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Sir?
Yes, Varsha. Yes.
Yeah, in the theta x expression you wrote, the first term would be R23 by C theta y.
Okay,
or
let me just pull up that expression again. Let us see. Theta y. Yes. Can you tell me now?
The theta x expression. A tan inverse
theta
2.
X expression, is it?
Yeah.
Theta
A
X
tan,
expression is here.
yeah.
A tan 2 of R32.
It's R23 by C theta y.
Is it R23 or R32? It's R23, is it? Okay, I'm sorry then.
R23, right? Tan
this
inverse.
element, basically. I'm referring to that element. R11, R12, R13, R2, R23. Correct. Sorry, R23.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. Oh, I just got confused. Yeah, thank
Correct.
you, sir.
Yeah, right. Yes, thanks. Next, Rushikesh has a question.
Sir, actually, I have one request. Sir,
Yes.
Because we have classes after your class, there is no time for doubt session. So can you arrange one doubt session per week extra?
I can do that. That's not an issue. We can have a doubt session.
Okay, sir. That will be very helpful.
Okay, we can have a doubt session. But
So,
I would need
Jayant,
to. Yes, Professor Gosha. Yes.
So we can have doubt session, no doubt, but Yogesh can help. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So the students can directly chat with Yogesh.
Yeah.
Okay. We can also come in whenever if there is some serious doubt. You can contact either of us or Yogesh. So
yes, sir.
That is all I wanted to say.
Yeah, Rushikesh, then we'll try one thing. You first channel your doubts, your questions to Yogesh. And then if he's able to satisfactorily, you can even CC me. You can directly contact me by email. That's also fine. Okay, if that channel works for you, then that's actually convenient for me. Otherwise, I have to trek up all the way to the department, to the MMCR to log in and meet all of you. So if that is not working out, then I will do this. Okay, I will show up at some later point that is mutually convenient to answer questions that students might have.
Okay, sir. No problem.
Okay.
Yeah, you can freely call me anytime. I'll respond. Okay.
Okay.
So Abhishek Kar has a question.
Yes, sir. No, my question is more for clarification regarding the practical usage of this theorem. So, I mean, you have to find theta x, theta y, theta z after you already know the direction cosines R11, R12, R13, etc.
Yes.
So, is it something like if a aircraft is meant to follow a certain flight pattern, the computer calculates the direction cosines it needs to have to move in a certain way, and then by solving that equation, the pilot knows which angles to control in order to achieve that particular frame.
Yes, that's one interpretation. Yes.
Right. So that's one of the practical usages of it.
Correct. Yes.
Right. Okay. That was it, I guess, for now.
Yeah. So Subhadip Sahu had a question.
Hello, sir. Good morning.
Good morning.
Sir, can you please repeat that what have you taught in the, about the top, rotating top? I could not follow the rotation. Can you please do it again? So it
Okay. So I, just as we picked a certain convention, XYZ convention for the aircraft, there can be other ways of going from frame A to frame B using Euler angles. Okay. And those other conventions sometimes naturally suggest themselves based on the geometry of the problem that you are looking at. Okay. So to give an example of one such convention, which is ZXZ convention, I took the example of the top. So here I drew the, I'm sorry, not this one. I probably drew a better schematic here. So here I drew the XA, YA, ZA inertial axis. Then about the origin of that inertial axis, you have this top that is spinning at some angle theta x to the vertical direction. Okay, and the spin direction is at this direction here. Okay, the symmetry. Now, how do I decompose? How do I obtain the intermediate frames for this particular case? I could still stick with XYZ Euler angles as would be useful to the pilot, that hypothetical pilot that we had in our discussion earlier. But a more natural choice for going from for the intermediate frames, for going from A frame to B frame, is to note that there is one defining axis for this problem, and that is the axis of spin, the symmetry axis of your top. So we therefore first consider the plane that is perpendicular to the symmetry axis, and that plane will be tilted, of course, and that tilted plane will intersect the XA-YA plane along a line. Intersection of two planes will always be a line, and that line will pass through the origin, because these two planes share, for example, the origin here. Okay. So now I can define my first rotation to be this angle theta z1, which is a rotation about the ZA axis by an angle theta z1 that will take me from the XA axis to this line, which is the intersection of that plane, which is perpendicular to the spin axis, and the XA-YA frame. So that is the first angle. This is the most natural way in which I can go from A frame to some other intermediate frame. I could have chosen instead to rotate about the x-axis as I did before, but it will not be natural to this problem, right? That will have no association or no relation with this symmetry axis that we have here. Then the second step is, given this frame XB1 YA and XB1 ZA and YB1, that frame will have a common Z axis. Okay, and it's the B1 Y1 will be rotated with respect to XB1 and YB1 will be rotated with respect to XA and YA. Now the second step is to rotate about the XB1 axis. Okay, to take the Z axis from its original position to the new axis of rotation. Okay, so this rotation theta x will take me from, will take the ZB1 axis, which is coincident with the ZA axis, to this axis of spin. Okay, and the YB1 axis will rotate to YB2. Okay, so this is the second rotation, second intermediate axis. So the B2 will be aligned along the symmetry axis. XB2 will be the same as XB1, and YB2 will be rotated with respect to YB1 by angle theta x about the axis XB1. So this is the XB2, YB2, ZB2 frame. And the final reference frame, which is XB, the frame fixed to the rigid body, is also going to be spinning with the rigid body. So it will have the Z axis the same as the axis of spin, which is the natural choice, right? And then I will have XY axis, in the plane perpendicular to the axis of spin. If this is, circularly symmetric, if this is a real, it's a object of a solid of revolution, then I can choose the XY axis of that B frame anywhere in this plane. Two orthogonal vectors anywhere in that plane perpendicular to ZB2 can serve as XB and YB axis. So the angle by which I have to rotate about the ZB2 axis to get YB2 and XB2 to coincide with XB and YB will be the last rotation, and that is theta z. Okay, that's also a rotation about the z axis, but this time this z axis. Okay, so that's why this is called ZXZ Euler angle. Okay, rotation about z axis first, rotation about x axis next, and z axis again will take me from A frame to the B frame. And this, I hope you see, is much more natural choice for the particular problem here, because we are choosing these on the basis of the orientation of the spin axis compared to the convention that we had used so far, namely X, Y, Z Euler angles, which if we were to adopt it here, will bear no relationship with the orientation of the or the pointing direction of the spin axis. So that's the explanation. So this is more natural for this problem. Okay.
Yes, sir. Sir, the last rotation you are doing that, sir. First of all, we are choosing a reference frame, means XY plane. So that's I could not get it. Means where we are trying to match it.
I could hear you clearly. There was some noise in the background. Can you please repeat?
Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you repeat? Yes, repeat your question, please.
Yes, sir. Sir, the last rotation you did, about the spin axis, sir. Means what is the initial XY plane, and after that, to which plane you are matching with that? Means
I will. So now that I have picked the Z, the final B axis, the ZB axis will be coincident with the spin axis, the axis of symmetry of the top. Okay. Then the XY axis will be chosen as two, arbitrary vectors in the plane that is perpendicular to the axis of the top. Okay, I pick any particular direction in that plane and call that as the XB axis. Because it's cylindrically symmetric, I don't need to exercise any judgment in identifying a suitable XB axis. YB axis will naturally get fixed because ZB and XB have been fixed. YB will automatically get fixed. Okay, this is fixed to a rigid body, so it is spinning along with a rigid body. Okay, now the XB2 and YB2 will be in general oriented at some angle theta z with respect to XB and YB. Okay, so that angle is the last angle that that would relate this last intermediate coordinate frame to the body frame. Is that did that answer your question or no?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, I understood. That means you have taken that any arbitrary XB, YB, and you are matching with them. Okay.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So I shall sign off. I don't think there are any further questions, so I shall sign off now.